And Iran now saying that the U.S. did not shoot down one of its drones over the Strait of Hormuz. This comes after President Trump said yesterday that a warship took down the drone in defensive action. Iranian state TV released this footage today. It's allegedly showing surveillance footage from the drone. Tehran says the video contradicts the U.S. timeline of the event. CBS News was not able to verify the drone is flying over the USS Boxer. But President Trump told reporters in the Oval Office today he is confident the U.S. shot down the drone. In a tweet, Iran's foreign minister, rebuked the president, saying, "We have not lost any drone in the Strait of Hormuz nor anywhere else. I am worried that USS Boxer has shot down their own USAs by mistake." CBS News national security correspondent David Martin reports from Saudi Arabia.
The Pentagon says the USS Boxer took defensive action when an Iranian drone came within 1,000 yards. The Boxer is an amphibious assault ship, part of a fleet deployed to the Persian Gulf to patrol shipping waters the U.S. accuses Iran of interfering with, an accusation President Trump repeated when he announced the drone had been brought down.
This is the latest of many provocative and hostile actions by Iran against vessels operating in international waters.
The downing came less than a month after Iran shot down an American drone, prompting the U.S. to prepare a retaliatory strike, which President Trump called off at the 11th hour. The U.S. says it has compelling evidence Iran is behind the sabotage and harassment of tankers passing in and out of the Strait of Hormuz. And most recently, Iran allegedly hijacked a small coastal tanker, claiming it was smuggling oil illegally. On Thursday, we flew with General Frank McKenzie, the top U.S. commander for the Middle East, into Saudi Arabia. McKenzie is in the region working to organize a flotilla of warships to escort tankers in and out of the Gulf, but not unless other countries participate.
That is an international responsibility, not a United States responsibility, but the United States is very happy to be part of the solution.
But only the U.S. can provide the air power to defend against Iranian attacks. The Pentagon is reportedly sending 500 troops to an airbase in Saudi Arabia, last used during the first Gulf War. Now, nearly 30 years later, there is the possibility of another war, this time against Iran.
Well, joining me now from Washington, Benham Taleblu. He's a senior fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. So, Benham, Iran now saying that they are denying that they even lost a drone. The U.S. is saying it is theirs. So how do you verify who's telling the truth here?
Well, great to be with you. And there is an escalating war of words as much as there is an escalation in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz right now. To me, it's quite clear. You could either believe the United States, the United States military, and the president, or you could believe the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. In my view, when you look at the past history of hyperbole in Iranian official videos, military parades, and even missile tests, there's been a lot of Photoshop and a lot of doctoring of images. And even when Iranians do take things of pictures in their vicinity via drone or other capabilities they have, they release them later to say that they are concurrent with a certain political timeline. So in my view, Iran has more of an incentive to misrepresent here. And I do believe that the drone was downed. An important question is, how was the drone downed? And based on some reporting, it seems to be an electronic warfare capability, meaning the U.S. did not have to fire a shot to bring down this drone.
If you step back for a little bit, the U.S. had offered Iran sanctions relief, and they put 12 conditions, most of which centered around its nuclear and military behavior in the region. Some critics said it was practically short of regime change. It was so strict. How does Iran view that, and do you see any sort of movement on that?
So I think Iran has long laughed, most unfortunately, at the 12 points put forward by the secretary. Iran believes that that is really a predicate for regime change, although now if you look at some of the behavior in the Gulf and in other theaters, I think they realize that there is no way out but through, that they do have to negotiate with the United States. And to me, this best explains the escalation. It means that the Iranians are looking for leverage, because if they are going to have to negotiate and eventually come to terms with the 12 points, which are again about behavior change and Iran's foreign and security policy outside of its borders, then the regime wants to negotiate from a position of strength and is looking in many of these different theaters to cultivate and create leverage. And harassing vessels in an unmanned way is one way. And I think they were looking for a different response by the Americans. And I think for the first time in the past few months, they ran into metal and not mush.
Iran's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, told reporters that Iran is committed to allowing international inspectors of its nuclear program. Do you think the Trump administration would go for that?
Well, I think the funny thing is that this shouldn't be treated as a concession by Tehran. This is something that Tehran owes the international community, even with or without a JCPOA nuclear deal. Iran, if it wants to enrich uranium on its own soil, and in fact does have that 18-year illicit history of hiding its procurement and production activities as relates to fissile material, and of course you overlay their desire for a weapon based on the strategic value such a weapon would provide the regime, and you overlay the fact that the nuclear program was resurrected during a military conflict, you have a reason not to trust Tehran, and you have a reason for Iran to make good on such pledges. And even when Iran did permit the IAEA access to the sites that the JCPOA circumscribes, those are all declared sites. The West, and in fact the international community's concern about Iran's nuclear program, is that almost all those declared sites were once undeclared sites. And what other undeclared sites are there that the IAEA isn't visiting? And this is one of the many issues in the U.S.-Iran relationship that is defined by mistrust and misrepresentation.
The president's main public demand has been that Iran not build nuclear weapons. If he were to reach a deal that offers some sort of sanctions relief in return for committing to stop building nuclear weapons, how would that be different from President Obama's deal?
Well, I think it's important to realize that when the president and other U.S. officials have been talking about the nuclear threat by Iran, in my view, in the short term, that is driven by moves that Iran is making in the nuclear domain, and the U.S. is issuing either red lines or policy goals with respect to Iran's nuclear program. As far as I can tell, U.S. policy remains centered around those 12 points that you mentioned earlier, which deal with the broad array of Iran's foreign and security policy challenges, of which nuclear is only one. So should the U.S. relieve sanctions based on covert or overt talks, bilateral, multilateral, whatever the form is, and the U.S. only reach a nuclear deal, even with amended or even better terms, in my view, that would still be a shortcoming because U.S. policy is aimed at changing Iran's behavior in the region and not taking Iran's regional behavior and malign activities into account would only repeat the mistakes of the past deal.
Iran's foreign minister said that Iran's not planning on waiting to see if the president loses re-election before re-entering any sort of a deal. What do you make of his words?
I think most unfortunately, some of Iran's political elite now understand U.S. domestic politics more so than ever before. They understand that max pressure, at least now, appears to be a partisan political proposition. And much of Iran's strategy under the first year of the max pressure campaign was actually centered around waiting out the Trump administration. But because the sanctions had been so effective, more effective than the Europeans and the Iranians, in fact, had likely assumed, they are now looking for creative ways to respond. And all this escalation, in my view, is proof that the sanctions are working and that Iran knows that it can't afford to wait out the Trump administration and must look for leverage in any way possible. And this is yet another exercise, albeit a very dangerous exercise, in a quest for leverage.
Benham and Taleblu, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.